What day is it, Mark?
Oh, good question. I was going to go on the Google machine, but I think it's Friday.
It's Friday. You know what that means, Mark?
Rapid Fire Friday.
Boom, boom, boom. Rapid Fire Friday.
Rapid
Fire Friday.
All right, I got a question for you. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
It's relevant to the verse, Luke 12:29 through 31.
Yeah,
I was hoping for some additional clarity.
I will give it a shot.
All right. I'm going to read it first. And do not seek what you are to eat and what you are to drink, nor be worried. For all the nations of the world seek after these things, and your Father knows that you need them. Instead, seek his kingdom, and these things will be added to you.
So more clarity on that. Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
please.
This is very similar to the Sermon on the Mount. It's the Sermon on the Plain, and he's speaking against worry, right? And so he's telling these Christians or these disciples that they don't need to worry. They can instead seek his kingdom. Don't worry about what you can eat. Don't worry what you can drink or wear, right? Because the temptation in a culture like that was spend all your time trying to plan to get enough to eat so as to dominate your life, right?
Yeah.
And instead he says, don't worry, seek first the kingdom of God. What does that mean? It means to live with Christ as the most important aspect of your life. So it's to seek his kingdom means to seek him and his purposes as the most important thing about you. So instead of making the most important thing about you, the most fundamental thing about you is finding food or finding clothes or finding a place,
Survival mode.
whatever that survival mode is. Instead of that, make the most important fundamental thing about you Jesus Christ, and express those needs. Right in the disciples' prayer, he doesn't, or the Lord's prayer. It's really a prayer for the disciples, so it's the disciples' prayer. In the Lord's prayer, he says, "Give us our daily bread." Right, so it's not as if he doesn't know we have daily needs. He made us, right?
Yeah.
He made us with mouths and stomachs, and he made us so that we need food and water and shelter. He made us that way. So what he's telling us is live in such a way so that more important than searching out those things you need is living in such a way as that you honor and focus on Jesus Christ is more important.
Awesome. Okay, just to follow that up with a little bit more, that to me was you're speaking to an individual. What about in the context of marriage? First of all, is it good to seek first the kingdom with your partner?
That's
your
the only
spouse?
way to be married, yes.
Right, yes. But what does that mean in the context of marriage? Does it just mean making sure that Jesus is the center of both of your lives and you're in a covenant relationship with him?
Yeah, it changes it a little bit. I mean, you think about Ephesians chapter 5, a husband's to love his wife as Christ loved the church, right?
Yeah.
So one of the ways he seeks the kingdom is by living in such a way as to serve his wife more than himself, to give preference to his wife more than himself, to lay down his life more than himself for his wife, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what that looks like in the context of a marriage. And if a husband is serving and giving himself up for his wife as Christ loved the church, and the wife is submitting to graciously, kindly, intelligently submitting to her husband, then both of them are seeking the kingdom of God, right? And so it's wrong for a husband to sort of seek the kingdom of God like he's an individual. He's not anymore.
Right, one flesh.
It's one flesh. And so this is something they do together, which means, when it comes to life decisions, you make life decisions together.
Yeah.
A husband doesn't just dictate what's going to happen.
Not domineering.
Not like last week I read a biography on A.W. Tozer, a great man who was a wonderful preacher in the first part of the 20th century, but he did not live with his wife in an understanding way. He would move the family without even consulting her under the guise of just following the Lord's will. And he didn't understand think about his wife. That is not following God's will.
Mm. Sad.
Sad.
Because despite that, he had a lot of good work.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. But he did not live with his wife in an understanding way.
Okay. Well, thank you for simplifying that. Another question is about the means of grace.
Means of grace, yes.
Yeah.
Like, what is it?
Yeah, what is it? I know it's not an exhaustive list, but how do they come about?
Yeah.
Yeah, what are some of them?
Yeah, so a means of grace doesn't mean that we create grace when we do these things. What it is a way, it's just a means of grace is the way I would define it is something that strengthens our faith and reliance on Jesus Christ, right?
Okay.
So what are the kinds of things that do that? Well, what strengthens our connection to Jesus? Well, communion, the Lord's Supper, attending church, sitting under biblical preaching, experiencing meaningful fellowship, prayer and Bible reading with other people, listening to someone's testimony, right? Having meaningful relationships with people so that you can be encouraged by them and they can encourage you. Being confronted where you need help, confronting others where they need help, weeping with those who weep, rejoicing with those who are rejoicing, right? So a means of grace is any activity that we can do to strengthen our connection to Jesus Christ. And more often than not, that involves other people, right?
Yeah.
And so one of the ways the Lord strengthens his church, one of the primary ways is not just a direct connection to the Lord, but through other people, right? And so like we fellowship together, and when we fellowship around the truth of the word, or as Christians, we build each other up.
Yeah.
That's a means of grace, right? There's something that happens when we're together that does not happen when we're alone.
Very true.
But at the same time, that doesn't mean we shouldn't pray alone. We shouldn't read the Bible alone. We shouldn't sacrificially give. We shouldn't serve. All of those things are means of grace. But so there's always an individual element to it and a corporate element to it. So that's what a means of grace is.
Awesome.
It's kind of a big catch-all term.
Yeah. It's like a overarching subject, and I was just curious more about it. I'm reading too much Jerry Bridges and
not too much.
Yeah,
Jerry Bridges.
there's no such thing.
Yeah, right.
Next, this question is an email question.
Yeah. Email bell. Boom, boom, boom.
And it comes from one of our high-ranking fans.
Okay.
In the Legion.
All right.
And that is Georgia Baird.
Thank
and I'm
you,
going to read her
Georgia.
email.
All right, read it.
Hey, Mark and Pastor Rich.
Just
another
call me
question
Rich,
for you.
Georgia. Don't call me Pastor Rich. Just Rich.
You heard that, Georgia, right?
Yeah, there we go. Keep going.
Okay. Hey, Mark and boop, Rich. Another question for you. Should people get the death penalty? In what cases? Thank you so much for answering all my questions. I love your podcast so much. Yours truly, Georgia Baird.
Thank you, Georgia,
Yes,
for the
thank you
question. Now, this
Questions.
is yeah, she has sent other questions in. This is a question that honest Christians will debate about the death penalty. If you look in the Old Testament law, there were crimes that were punished by the death penalty, and most of those crimes are crimes of murder.
Yeah.
And so murder was one of those crimes that led to the death penalty. There were others, and I'm not going to do an exhaustive explanation of the Old Testament law when it comes
That would take
to
a while.
this. But the question of death penalty is a question that honest Christians are going to disagree with. Some Christians believe that it's always wrong. Other Christians will say, because we see this pattern in the Old Testament, that there are instances where we should.
Like precedent for it.
Yeah. And so Romans 13 talks about the role of government. So good government is going to be a government that sort of that militates against bad things, right?
Yeah.
And so that's where this is delegated to the state, right? So the state, this is one of the realms where the state has jurisdiction over questions of the death penalty. The church does not and cannot execute a death penalty because that's not in our realm.
Yeah.
That is for the state to decide. Now, good states have good laws, bad states have bad laws. And so it gets fuzzy when, if you're in a good state with a good law, or when I say state, I don't mean like Arizona, I mean
Nation state.
nation, right? And so these are questions that people can disagree about. I've heard other Christians say, listen, I don't believe in the death penalty because what if we get it wrong?
That's fair.
And I also have heard other people say that, I believe we should because we see it in the Old Testament.
Also
and
fair.
if it's clear, yeah. And so I think this is where we come down to a place where honest Christians can disagree. And that's really where it boils down to in my mind. I mean, if I had to say, do I believe in the death penalty? When someone murders someone else, I can get there. I mean, I can understand that.
Yeah.
The fact that our state does that. And so I do think that there needs to be, as I think about sort of a state response to evil, I do think there needs to be, in any good state, a response, a swift and just response to evil.
Mm.
Right?
So order over lawlessness.
Order over lawlessness. That's right. And so what we have to do, and that's where honest Christians are going to disagree
On how to enforce that order.
how to enforce that order. That's right. And
good.
so that includes the death penalty.
So you were talking about Romans 13, and it just made me think of just the first couple of verses. Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment.
Yeah.
So now that doesn't, obviously, you can move where there's a different authority. There's a lot of things you can do, but ultimately that power given to someone making those decisions at the highest level is there because of God's sovereign.
Yes, but there are times that the governing authorities are evil.
For sure.
That's where it gets difficult.
Yeah, you're not to follow them into sin.
No. And that's one of the things John Calvin said. He said one of the ways God judges a nation is by giving them bad leaders.
Wow. That's fascinating.
It is.
That's awesome. Well, if you're more interested in that, feel free to reach out. And that's all the questions I have for now.
For now, but there will be another Friday that comes. Because you know what, Mark? They come once every 7 days.
Every 7.
Every 7. And
All
so
right.
Rapid Fire Friday, we'll be back.
All right. Well, I'm going to hold you to that.
All right, sounds good.
Take care, guys.